Hello to all our listeners. We will be studying today Hilchot Eruvin, Chapter 2. I'm Joey Faor here teaching. I'll give a little introduction to the chapter before we start. In the previous chapter, we studied about the concept of Eruv, the mixing together of a group of people residing in their own private sectors of a larger private domain encompassing them. The Eruv is what allows this group of people to carry from in their own sectors and into the jointly owned private domain area. We also learned that without performing the Eruv in an adequate manner, it is forbidden for the people to carry from their own sectors to the jointly owned area and vice versa. Again, the Eruv is needed either in a haser, which we said is a place where you have people residing in a larger private domain in their own sectors of it, or mebo'ot, which are alleyways that have haserot or private homes opened into them. These also need Eruvin in order to be able to carry from into the private sectors and into the mavo and vice versa. And there's also, an Eruv could be done for an entire city, like Shitufei Mavo'ot, the same type of Eruv of Shitufei Mavo'ot could be done for an entire city that has a 10 tefahim wall around it and gate that closes at night. So, a little more, in this chapter, we will see that there's a way in which the Eruv will be considered an adequate one, even if not all of the people living around the jointly owned yard, haser or mabo, partake in the Eruv. This is done by bitul reshut, the canceling of one's ownership of his sector around the privately owned haser, to be considered as owned by the rest of the neighbors. The aforementioned, in other words, bitul, could only be done in a haser of Jews and could only be done, as we'll see later in the chapter, with one person. It cannot be done with more than one person. However, in a haser of non-Jews, this cannot be done. And neither can an Eruv be done, and neither can an Eruv be done. So you cannot do bitul reshut, neither could you do an Eruv with a goy. The only thing that could be done in order to allow Jews living around the jointly owned haser to be allowed to carry from their sectors of the domain is and to their homes and vice versa, is by temporarily renting the property of the non-Jew for Shabbat. We will see more details on how that can be done and how that can be done with, it's a rather precarious situation. Another point to mention is that the reason an Eruv is not permitted with a goy or doing bitul reshut for goyim, because Hachamim, as we'll see later in the chapter, did not want people living with goyim. We'll see that later in the chapter, that it's in regard also to living alone with a goy. We'll see. All of the details regarding the aforementioned two matters will be discussed in the following chapter. So let's start. Halacha Aleph. Anshe haser she'erevu kullan חוץ מאחד מהן שלא ערב עמהן במזיד בין שוכח, הרי זה אוסר עליהן, ואסור לכולן להוציא מבתיהן לחסר או מחסר לבתיהן. So the residents of a haser, the tenants of a haser that all did Eruv, except one of the tenants of the haser who did not do Eruv with them, whether it was on purpose or not, or he forgot, he, by virtue of him not being part of their Eruv, makes it so that the Eruv is invalid, and therefore nobody could take in and out of their own sectors to the jointly owned part of the haser and vice versa. However, ביטל להן זה שלא ערב רשות חסרו בלבד, הרי אלו מותרים להוציא ולהכניס לבתיהן לחסר ומחסר לבתיהן, אבל לביתו אסור. However, if the tenant who did not partake in the Eruv did what we call bitul reshut, the canceling of his property to their properties. In other words, he makes it so that he says that his property is not owned by him, and it is now theirs. It is now that belongs to the other tenants. Okay? So the one person that tenant did bitul reshut, if he does it, the rest of the people, the rest of the tenants of the haser may take in and out of their houses into the haser and vice versa. However, to his house, it is not permitted. However, if the tenant that did not do Eruv did bitul to his house and to his part of the jointly owned area of the haser, they may all take in and out. They may, because they already didn't Eruv and there was bitul and his house is as though it belongs to them, it's part of their property. וגם הוא מותר מפני שלא נשאר לו רשות והרי הוא כאורח הסלאם והאורח asur, and he's allowed to carry in and out because he, by virtue of doing this canceling of property, he has no property in this haser, and he ends up going to the level of a oreach, of a guest, and therefore he may carry in and out like a guest would be able to. Halakha bet. המבטל רשותו סתם. Right, now just one more point on halakha aleph. The hiddush in halakha aleph is that the person, the tenant that did not do eruv, is allowed to cancel part of the domain even if he originally didn't partake in the eruv on purpose. It would be thought that in a situation like that, he may be considered like a goy, or that he wouldn't be allowed to be mevatel reshut to them, but the case isn't such, and he's in fact allowed to be mevatel reshut to the rest of the residents of the haser. That's just one point that needed to be mentioned. So halakha bet. המבטל רשותו סתם. רשות חסרו ביטל, רשות ביטלו לא ביטל. Somebody who arbitrarily does bitul to his property. He doesn't specify what property exactly is mevatel. Is he mevatel his own private sector of the haser, or is he mevatel his part of the jointly owned part of the haser? If he just says arbitrarily, I'm mevatel my reshut hasero bitel, reshut beto lo bitel. The part that he owns in the haser, the jointly owned part, he did bitul on. However, his own home does not fall under this bitul. והמבטל רשותו לבני חסר, צריך לבטל לכל אחד ואחד בפירוש, ואומר רשותי מבוטלת לך ולך ולך. And somebody who does a bitul for the tenants of the haser needs to specify his bitul to each one of the tenants of the haser. והיורש, and an inheritor, מבטל רשות אף על פי שמת מורישו בשבת, שהיורש תחת מורישו הוקם לכל דבר וביטול רשות בשבת מותר לך תחילה. And a inheritor that receives inheritance of a certain property, even if the inheritance was received to him on Shabbat, for example, the person, the owner of this property passed away on Shabbat, he may do this canceling of the reshut. And this is another law, the canceling of the reshut may be done on Shabbat lecha tehillah, from the get-go. If somebody forgot to partake in the eruv, or he did not want to partake in the eruv, so he may bitul reshut on Shabbat for the benefit of the tenants of the haser. Halakha gimel. ביטלו אלו המערבים רשותן לזה שלא ערב, הוא מותר שהרי נשאר לבדו, והם אסורים שלא נשאר להן רשות. ואין אומרים יהיו כאורחין אצלו, שאין רבין אורחין אצל אחד. Now, we're still in the case where one tenant did not partake in eruv. However, in this case, we have a situation in which all the other tenants of the haser, bitelu, canceled their reshut to the one tenant who did not do eruv. So I'll give an example to illustrate. Imagine you have 5 tenants living in their own separate domains, in their own separate properties within a haser. And one of the tenants, I'll call him Shimon, does not partake in the eruv. So in the previous halachot, we saw that Shimon could make his property owned, it could say that his property is owned by the rest of the tenants, and which we call bitul reshut, could cancel his ownership of the property for the benefit of allowing people to be to carry, and then he goes to the level of a guest. However, people, if these 4 other tenants of the haser want to cancel their ownership, one moment. I will get back. I'm sorry for the little stop. I was sick with something. Okay. So back to halakha gimel. So if the 4 residents in our illustrative example decide to cancel their ownership of their property for the benefit of this one person that did not partake in their eruv, he may carry because he is left alone. However, they may not carry because they do not have any part in the residency, in the ownership. And we don't say that they become like guests because in Urahin Saliha, in Rabbin Urahin Saliha, we don't have so many people that come as guests in one person's property. And therefore, it cannot be done vice versa. So if one person wants to cancel if one person wants to cancel his ownership of the property for the benefit of everybody else and allow everybody to carry in whichever the way we saw, it may be done. However, they cannot do so for him if there are a lot of people and he is one. If the tenants that did not do Eruv were two or more people, two or more tenants of the Haser, right. If these two decided to cancel their ownership for the benefit of the Me'arabin, those who did the Eruv may carry, however, these cannot. The ones who did not, the tenants who did not partake in the Eruv. However, the tenants who did do Eruv cannot cancel their ownership for the benefit of the two who did not do Eruv. Why? We said they can for one, but they can't do for two. Because once the tenants who did Eruv cancel their property to one of the people, then that one person is considered to be osir al-habiro, to disallow his friend to carry, because they both don't have an Eruv. And even if the second person who did not do an Eruv, now after everybody cancels their property to the one of the people who doesn't, one of the tenants who didn't do Eruv, the second tenant who didn't do the Eruv wants to cancel his ownership of the property to the first tenant, he cannot do so. Why? Because when the bitul, when the Me'arabin did, when all the people who did the Eruv, did partake in the Eruv, did the bitul reshut for the benefit, for their own benefit, this second guy, the second tenant who didn't partake in the Eruv, was disallowed. أحد شعريب إنه مبطل رشوته لأحد أحد شعريب إنه مبطل رشوته لأحد شلو عريب أبلا أحد شلو عريب مبطل رشوته لأحد شعريب. Now imagine you had two people living in a haser. Sorry, so the law is like this. Harambam concludes: somebody who did an Eruv cannot cancel his reshut to somebody who did not do an Eruv. However, somebody who did not do an Eruv could cancel his reshut to somebody who did an Eruv. So, in any event, just a little point on our halakha in regard to the case where two forgot, it would seem, where two people forgot to partake in the Eruv, it would seem that if one of the two forgot to partake in Eruv, cancel their ownership to the other, and after that everybody else canceled their ownership to him, then it would work. But it's, it needs to be this bemet tzarich ayun. In any event, the guiding rule for these two halachot is that someone who did an Eruv cannot cancel his ownership for someone who didn't do an Eruv. But someone who didn't do an Eruv can cancel his ownership for somebody who did an Eruv. Okay. Now, it seems that this halakha and the next one are going to be dealing with someone who only did bitul of his part of the jointly owned haser and not of his entire ownership of the area. So that's just a little hakdama to our coming halakha. We said if somebody does, so I'm just going to go back because these are difficult halachot to understand. Therefore, I'm also taking my time because really the halachot need to come in slowly to be clearly understood. So we said that if somebody does bitul reshut and doesn't specify, so it is considered that he did bitul to his part of the jointly owned area and not his own private sector. Okay? And if that in a case such as that, the residents of the haser who did Eruv may carry, however he may not. And they may not carry into his house. They may carry in the haser from their houses into the haser, but not into his house, and he may not carry at all. However, if he specifically does bitul to all of his ownership of the haser, including his house and his ownership of the jointly owned part of the haser, in that case, they are all allowed to carry. The following halachot seem to be regarding a case in which the person did a bitul only on his part of the jointly owned part of the haser. Again, only, we have a guy who didn't do irub, and he did bitul only of the part that he owns in the jointly owned part of the haser. This is important to understand the next coming halachot. כשם שבעל בית זה, right. כשם שבעל בית זה מבטל לבעל בית זה רשותו בחסר אחת, כך מבטלים מחסר לחסר ומבטלים וחוזרים ומבטלים. כיצד? שניים ששרויים בחסר ולא ערבו, אחד מהם מבטל רשותו לשני, ונמצא השני מטלטל ברשותו שביטל לו חברו, עד שיעשה סר אחר. וחוזר השני ומבטל רשותו לראשון, ומטלטל הראשון ברשותו שביטל לו. וכן כמה פעמים, ויש ביטול רשות בחורבה, כדרך שהוא בחסר. So the same way, right. So it seems that this case, so we have a case here where the same way, so the same way the two tenants living in the same haser could do bitul reshut one to another within the haser. Also, bitul reshut could be done from haser to haser, from two people living in separate haserot that are connected via an alleyway. Also, another point, mevatelin vechozerin mevatelin. It could be done, people could do bitul. I could do bitul to my friend. In other words, bitul, cancel my ownership of a property to the tenant, and then he's allowed to carry wherever he wants. And then he could do, and then I could go back on my bitul, and he does bitul, so I could carry wherever I want. It seems that this is in a case where neither of them did an eruv, and they wanted to cancel their ownership one to the other. Apparently, the type of canceling that they're allowed to go back and forth on is the type specified in Halacha 1 that I spoke about, in which one of the residents cancels only his ownership of the jointly owned part of the haser. And then the other person or people could carry everywhere, but in the guy who did bitul reshut to his house, except the guy who did bitul reshut's house. And from this type of eruv, it is possible to go back and forth. So again, we're talking about a situation in which they did not do eruv at all on Shabbat, and now Shabbat came, so they want to do bitul one for another, and where the bitul did not specify the house, but specified only the part of the haser. Okay. Also, another point, there is bitul reshut in the khurba. This could be done a few times, and there is bitul reshut in the khurba, in a ruin that is jointly owned by people. Bitul reshut can be performed. מי שביטל רשותו וחזר וטלטל ברשות שביטל, אם במזיד הוציא, הרי זה אוסר עליהם, שהרי לא עמד בביטולו. ואם בשוגג הוציא, אינו אוסר, שהרי הוא עומד בביטולו. Somebody did bitul reshut, and then he decided to carry in the reshut that he bitel. In other words, he did the bitul reshut in the way specified in Halacha 1. In other words, that he, in a way that does not allow him to carry, and now he goes and carries. If he did it on purpose, then the bitul reshut is held invalid, and therefore everybody is not allowed to carry. However, if he did not do it on purpose, if he did it b'shogeg, then his bitul reshut is still valid, and everybody could carry. But מדברים אמורים שלא קדמו ויחזיקו אלו שבטל להם, אבל אם קדמו ויחזיקו והוציאו, אם חזר הוא והוציא בין שוגג ובין מזיד אינו עושה להם. And what? This is all on condition. The aforementioned is all on condition that after that the guy who did bitul reshut, his property wasn't taken by the rest of the tenants of the haser. However, if the property was already acquired post bitul reshut by the other tenants of the haser, then whether the guy walks or not with things is not the problem of the other tenants of the haser, and the bitul does not become invalid even if he carries b'mezid. Halacha zayin. Shene batim b'shne sidei reshut הרבים, והקיפום גויים בחיסה בשבת. אין מבטלים לזה לזה, הועיל, ואי אפשר להם לערב מאמש. So two houses that are on two sides of the public domain. Okay? For example, you have a road, which is public domain, and on the right side of the road there's a house, and on the left side of the road there's a house. Now these people cannot do eruv because there's a public domain. There's no way for them to carry from house to house. However, there's a situation in which goyim maybe would come on Shabbat and put some sort of partition, a wall, or mehisa, some kind of wall or partition around these houses on Shabbat, causing the whole area to be a private domain, encompassing the houses, the two houses from both sides of the Reshut Rabim, and then it's like a haser, and you would think maybe you could do eruv. They nevertheless cannot do bitul one to another or eruv one to another, because in Ben Hashemashot, as I explained yesterday in last chapter, the eruv, there has to be a situation in which the eruv was possibly done in Ben Hashemashot. And because in Ben Hashemashot there was no eruv, they cannot do an eruv on Shabbat. And because they couldn't do an eruv in Ben Hashemashot, then they also cannot do bitul reshut one to another. אחד מבני חסר שמת, והניח רשותו לאחד מן השוק. אם מת מבעוד יום, הרי היורש שאינו מבני החסר אוסר עליהם. If ואם מת משחשיכה אינו אוסר עליהם. Somebody who is a tenant in a haser who died and inherited his ownership of the house and his part of the haser to somebody that was not from the haser, somebody who has shuk, from outside the haser. If the guy died from the daytime, from before Shabbat, then they need to contact the inheritor in order to have him take part in the eruv. And if he does not, he disallows them from carrying. However, if the guy died from after Shabbat already came in and there was an eruv in place, then his being not part of the eruv, or his being not part of the haser, or his somebody owning a new ownership going on this tenant's part of the haser, does not consider the eruv invalid, because the eruv was valid in the time of Ben Hashemashot. אחד מן השוק שמת והניח רשותו לאחד מבני החסר. אם בעוד יום מת אינו אוסר. שהרי כולן מעורבים, ואם מת משחשיכה אוסר עליהן עד שיבטל להן רשות מורישו. So this is referring to someone who owned a house in that specific haser but did not live in the haser, and thus none of the residents of the haser did eruv with him, nor did he have to do eruv with him. So there is a case where you have somebody who has ownership of a certain house in a haser. Okay, you have a tenant, we'll call him Eruvin, who has ownership in a haser. And this haser, but he does not live in the haser. And therefore, by virtue of him not living in the haser, he does not have to partake in any eruv, because he's not part of the haser, he's away from the haser, and his house is considered to be like canceled. However, if this guy, Eruvin, dies, and people in the haser inherit his house, and these are one of the people that live in the haser, if he died from the day, then he does not hold the eruv invalid, because they hold the eruv, even the guy who receives his inheritance, the inheritance. However, if he dies from the night, he holds the eruv invalid until the inheritor of the reshut does bitul for the reshut that he inherited on Shabbat. This is a difficult halakha to understand, so I'm going to go over it as concisely as I can once more. You have somebody who has ownership in a haser. So if, for example, we have a haser with 4 tenants. One of the tenants has ownership, his name is Eruvin, but he does not live in the haser, so he does not need to partake in any of the eruvin, and they may do eruvin without him. Now, this tenant passes away on Shabbat, and his inheritor lives in the haser as one of the other 3 tenants. Now we have a problem. We have an issue. If the inheritor did eruv from the daytime, and if the guy died from the daytime and the guy inherited his property, if the Eruvin died from the daytime and the inheritor inherits the property from the daytime and they did eruv, it is okay. However, if Eruvin dies from after Shabbat started, then the inheritor must do bitul reshut on his newly inherited part of the haser, in order to allow people to carry. Halakha hayt. Yisrael v'ger shesheruim b'ma'ara achat. Now, to understand this halakha, we need to understand a little bit about gerim. A ger is a proselyte, somebody who entered Judaism, a non-Jew who entered Judaism. A proselyte does not have any yorashim, he does not have any inheritors by family, and therefore, if he dies, his inheritance does not automatically go to anyone. It goes to the Beit Din. So if a Jew and a proselyte are living in one cave, okay, and cave has the status of a haser. ומת הגר מבעוד יום, אף על פי שלא החזיק ישראל אחר בן חסיו עד שחשיכה, הרי זה המחזיק אוסר עד שיבטל, שהרי הוא כיורש. So if the proselyte died from before Shabbat, even though nobody, now the property of a proselyte becomes hefker, anybody could take it. In other words, if property of a ger has the level of hefker, and anybody could take it for himself because he has no inheritors. So if the proselyte, okay, now this is of course in condition that the proselyte did not have kids after becoming a Jew. If he had kids after becoming a Jew, his kids are his inheritors. We're talking about anybody that was related to him by family before he became a Jew. Okay, but if he has his family like that doesn't, they do inherit. So we're talking about a proselyte that has no inheritors. If this proselyte died from the daytime, even though nobody held, no other Jew held his property until the nighttime, the other Jew, the mahazik, oser al sheyevatel she'areu kiyoresh. Okay, so a proselyte does not have any inheritors, and therefore his inheritance becomes ifker, no man's property, waiting for somebody to come and acquire the property. Our halakha is the following. A natively born Jew and a proselyte that live together in a cave have their own private sector in the cave as well as a jointly owned area in the cave. Therefore, in order to carry, they must make an eruv in order to carry. If a proselyte in such a situation dies before Shabbat, if nobody held his property before Shabbat, then the natively born Jew doesn't need to have an erub in order to carry. However, if somebody held the property whether before Shabbat came in or not, the native Jew living in the cave cannot carry unless an erub is created before Shabbat or unless the new owner of the property cancels his property to the Jew living in the cave. However, if the proselyte died after Shabbat came in, then whatever status was from before the proselyte dies stays the whole Shabbat, even if somebody took hold of the property. Okay, so the difficult halakha again, and I'm taking my time, but I hope you guys understand these halachot due to me going a little bit slower than usual. Halakha tet. In the introduction, I said that there's an eruv cannot be made with a goy. In the following halachot and until the end of the chapter, we will see the laws regarding a goy living in a haser along with Jews and what could be done in such a situation, the details. Halakha tet. A Jew who lives with a non-Jew or a ger toshav, a non-Jew, a goy who does the seven Noahide laws in a haser, the non-Jew, the goy, is not oser alav, does not dispermit the Jew from carrying on Shabbat. And this is only if it's one Jew and one goy, okay? Or a few Jews and one goy. They do not dispermit, the one goy does not dispermit the Jew or the Jews from carrying on Shabbat. Because the residency of a goy is not considered a residency because the goy is like a behema. And there's a pasuk, besar hamorim besaram. I'm not going to translate that. I take it back. We're talking about the beginning of the halakha is in a situation where you have one Jew and one goy living in the same haser, and they're not osrim alehim. The goy does not disallow the Jew from carrying. However, if it was more than one Jew living with a goy, the goy shochen al-mahen, osir alehen. The goy dispermits them from carrying within the haser if it's more than one Jew. And this is a prohibition made by Hachamim so that people do not have a goy living amongst them, so that they do not learn from the goy's actions. from the way the goy acts. And why in that case is there no prohibition enacted in a case where one Jew lives with one goy? Because living alone with a goy is not something that is found, and we're talking about the days of Harambam, not the days of the Talmud, and this is for the reason that there's an isur of being alone with a goy, which is mentioned in Ilchot Rosah. And in theory, this isur is applicable until our time, by the way. The law is the law because in the long galut, the track record of the goyim has been more than imperfect, and life is one of the most important values in Judaism. So there's an isur to be alone with a goy in a room or whatnot. Mamash like isur yehud. I'm not making Pesach halacha today. This is halacha lema'aseh. Each person go to your own rabbi. However, this is why living alone with a goy, because it was something so unfound, there was no prohibition, no special gezerah made. Halacha yod. שני ישראלים וגוי השוכנים בחצר אחת וערבו הישראלים לעצמם לא העלו כלום. Two Jews and a goy living in the same chaser, and the two Jews didn't eruv for themselves. They did not do anything, because as we said, the goy dispermits them from carrying. וכן אם ביטלו לגוי ביטל להן וביטלו הישראלים זה לזה ונעשו כיחיד עם הגוי לא העלו כלום. Even if ביטול reshut was done, whether from the goy to the Jews or from the Jews one to another, making it supposedly one person living with the goy, it does not help. שאין עירוב מועיל במקום הגוי ואין ביטול רשות מועיל במקום הגוי, because neither עירוב nor ביטול רשות work in a case where there's a goy and more than one Jew. ואין להן תקנה אלא שיזכרו ממנו רשותו ויעשה הגוי כאילו הוא אורח מהן. And the only way for them to be allowed to carry while there's a goy in the haser is if they rent the goy's property from him, making it like the goy has no property, and then the goy will be considered like a guest amongst them. And this is obviously a very difficult thing to do, but meaning it's something that's the only way. And if there are many goyim, the same law is applicable, the same laws are applicable, and the only way to be able to carry with many goys living with more than one Jew in a haser is if they the Jews rent the property from the goy, or the goyim. And one Jew, it is enough for one Jew to rent the property from the goy in order to make it so that the goy is considered a guest amongst them, and then he may do eruv with the rest of the Jews, and they are all allowed to carry that way. Not every, it doesn't need to be that all the residents, all the tenants of the haser do rent the property of the goy. It's enough for one person, as logically understood. הלכה י"א, שתי חסרות זו לפני מזו, וישראל אחד וגוי דרים בפנימית, וישראל אחד בחיצונה. So we have an example here of one haser that has another haser inside of it. So imagine a large haser with two houses in it. And then there's another walled segment in the haser that has two more houses in it. Okay, so there's haser, bitoch haser, a haser inside a haser. And we have, in the inner haser, you have a Jew and a goy. And in the outer, you have only one Jew. Or, for example, you have a Jew and a goy in the outer haser, and a Jew living in the inner haser. In this situation, the goy disallows those living in the outer one until they rent from him. Why? So the goy living in the inner haser disallows the Jew living in the outer haser, because you have two Jews in one haser. In the outer haser, if you look at the outer haser, if you were to just ask how many Jews are living in this haser, you would say more than one Jew, because the inner haser is encompassed within the outer haser, and therefore in eruv the goy's property has to be rented. However, if in the penimi, the Jew living alone with the goy in the penimi is allowed to carry, because we said a Jew living alone with the goy may carry in and out of the haser, because it's not something that is found. Halacha yud bet. Socherim min goy afilu b'Shabbat. the renting of the house of a goy could be done even on Shabbat, which is a big kula. I mean, it's normally would be not allowed to do things like that on Shabbat, but here it is allowed. Here, because the shechirut really is a lot like bitul reshut. It's I don't want to say fictitious, but it's a sort of kind of just measure that is taken to keep us, as I said, remembering, as I said last chapter, to remember the idea of reshuyot, that there's something that we're doing extra here because we're in a haser, and we do not want to end up carrying from reshut yahid to reshut rabim, and that's why we do iru. So this is enough, because it's derabanan, it's a derabanan law, so Hachamim made it a little bit easier. Because this renting of a goy is not a real long-term renting, but rather heker, it's something made to remind us, as a reminder. לפיכך סוחרים מן הגוי אפילו בפחות משווה פירוטה ואשתו של הגוי בפחות משווה פירוטה. And therefore this renting could be done even with less than שווה פירוטה. Usually שווה פירוטה is the minimum amount of money for any transaction, for any actual transaction. However, here we could the renting of the goy's property could be done even with less than שווה פירוטה, which is a very small amount. ואשתו של הגוי מזכרת שלא מדעתו. And even the renting of the goy's property could be done on the through his wife, who does it even without the goy, the owner, knowing. She just does it on behalf of him. Also, somebody who rented from the goy may rent for the a worker of the goy or the slave of the goy could rent his rent the goy's property on his behalf to the Jews. And even if his slave or workers were Jewish, they may rent his property to the other Jews on his behalf, without him even knowing. Somebody, and now really this is going, imagine a goy that's very stubborn and does not want to rent his space to any Jew, then therefore there's a special loophole. If a Jew lends space from the goy, even very little space, then he could rent the goy's space on behalf of the goy as though he was one of the goy's tenants, therefore making it a lot easier to do the renting of the goy's property than would be thought if I were to just say you have to rent the goy's property. So it's a little bit easier. So even in a case where a Jew rents or lends a small space to the goy, he may rent the goy's property on behalf of the goy to the other Israelites, the other Jews living in the Haser. If the Jew, even if the goy had many workers or slaves or wives, and one of them rented the goy's property on his behalf, even without the goy knowing, it's enough for us to be allowed to carry. Because as I said, this whole thing is done for heker, for a reminder, so that we do not forget about Reshut Rabim and Reshut Yahid, the idea of Reshut Rabim and Reshut Yahid on Shabbat. הלכה י"ג שני ישראלים וגוי חדרים בחצר אחת וצחרו מן הגוי בשבת חוזר האחד ומוותר רשותו לשני ומותר. So in a situation we have two Jews and one goy living in a chaser, and the property of the goy was rented as prescribed in the previous halachot. So another goy is considered a guest amongst them, and you still have two Jews and they did not do an eruv. So one of the Jews may do bitul reshut to the other Jew, and vice versa, and that would make them allowed to carry on Shabbat. And if the goy died on Shabbat, then the two Jews could do bitul reshut, one to the other, and the other to the one to another, and that would be sufficient to allow them to do tiltul on Shabbat, in the Haser, of course. Halakha yod גוי שהזכיר מגוי, אם אין הראשון יכול להוציא הגוי השני עד שישלים זמן צחילותו, סוחרים מזה הגוי השני. שהרי נכנס תחת הבעלים, ואם יש רשות לראשון להוציא את הגוי הסוחר ממנו בכל עת שירצה, אם לא היה השני עומד וסחרו הישראלים מן הראשון, הרי אלו מותרים. Now we're talking about a situation where a non-Jew, in which there is a goy tenant of a goy landlord, if the goy landlord is not allowed to throw the goy out, in other words, if the goy tenant is in the land of the goy landlord for a decided unchangeable amount of time defined ahead of time, then the Jews living in that haser must rent the land from the tenant. And the owner isn't able to rent on behalf of his tenant. In other words, the landlord, Goy, cannot rent his property to the Jews on behalf of his tenant. However, if the landlord can take the tenant out whenever he wants to, then they can rent the tenant's land through the landlord. This is all on condition that the tenant is not around. But if the tenant is around, then this cannot be done. In other words, even what we said here, if the tenant is not around, but if the tenant's around, doesn't matter. הלכה ט"ו. חסר שישראלים וגוי שרויים ביתך, והיו חלונות פתוחים מבית ישראלי זה לבית ישראלי זה, ועשו עירוב דרך החלונות, אף על פי שהן מותרים להוציא מבית לבית דרך חלונות, הרי הן אסורים להוציא מבית לבית דרך פתחים מפני הגוי, עד שיזכיר שאין רבים נעשים בעירוב כיחיד במקום הגוי. In a situation in which you have many Jews living in a chaser with a goy, and one of the houses, and you have a house of the Jews that is connected via a window, via an opening. So they do an eruv just through this opening between the two houses. So to take in and out of the house from the two Jews' houses through that window is mutar by virtue of the eruv. However, to take out to the haser is not allowed because of the goy that lives with them in the haser. Halakha Tzayin. Yisrael shu mehallel Shabbat befarhisya, or shu abed avodah zarah. This is a halakha which has many implications. It is about a Jew who does not properly perform mitzvot, etc., and we will see right now. So Yisrael shu mehallel Shabbat befarhisya, a Jew who is mehallel Shabbat befarhisya, for the eyes of everybody, or shu abed avodah zarah, or that he is an idol worshipper. He is like a goy for everything, for all of his things, for all of his own things, and there are some diukim to be made on that. And eruv cannot be performed with him. And he cannot do bitul reshut either, like a regular Jew. But rather, we treat him like a goy in regard to eruv, and in order to be able to carry with him, we have to do sechira. We have to rent the property from him. אבל אם היה מן המינים שאין עומדים עבודה זרה ואין מחללים שבת כגון הסדוקים ובהתוסין וכל הכופרים בתורה שבעל פה, כללו של דבר כל מי שאינו מודה במצוות עירוב אין מערבים עמו. However, if there was a Jew that was a min, that was the status of a min, for example, somebody that does not believe in the Torah שבעל פה, or that is kofer, etc., okay, even if he doesn't do עבודה זרה, we may not do, and the guideline here is anybody who does not modeh b'misvat eruv, does not consider misvat eruv to be a valid misvah because he only believes in the Torah shebichtav or something like that, or he has some sort of belief issue, which is it's a very broad range, but it's talking about people that blatantly consider eruv to be fake, has v'shalom, or blatantly consider the Torah shebe'al peh to not be, etc. אין מערבים עמו לפי שאינו מודה בעירוב, ואין סוחרים ממנו לפי שאינו כגוי, אבל מבטל רשותו לישראל הכשר. So in this type of guy who doesn't believe in the Torah שבעל פה, this type of mean, we do not do עירוב with him because he does not agree with the עירוב, and we do not rent from him because he's not a blatant goy, but rather he may do bitul reshut to us and therefore allow us to carry. וזוהי תקנתו. וכן אם היה ישראל לחב קשר, and also, if this type of person who is like a sedoki, who doesn't believe in the Torah shebe'al peh, is in the haser with a Jew alone, then he must do bitul reshut to the Jew in order to allow the other Jew to carry with him on Shabbat, since he cannot do Eruvin or rent, or the property be rented from him because he's not a goy. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.